The House Transportation, Mobility, and Infrastructure Committee will come to order. Would the clerk please read in the letter from Speaker Tate?
January 17th, 2023. Dear Clerk Brown, I appoint the following members of the 102nd Legislature to the standing committees for the 2023-2024 legislative session. Transportation, Mobility, and Infrastructure. Nate Shannon, Chair. Sharon McDonald, Vice Chair. John Fitzgerald. Jason Hoskins. Jennifer Conlon. Kevin Coleman. Albus Farhat. Reggie Miller. Pat Outman, Minority Vice Chair. John Roth. Alicia St. Germain. William Bruck. Tom Coots. Sincerely, Joe Tate, Speaker of the House.
Would the clerk please take attendance?
Chair Shannon.
Present.
Representatives McDonald.
Present.
Coleman.
Here.
Conlon.
Present.
Farhat.
Present.
Fitzgerald.
Present.
Hoskins.
Here.
Miller.
Here.
Outman.
Here.
Roth.
Here.
Bruck.
Here. Present.
Koontz.
Present.
St. Germain.
Present.
Mr. Chair, you do have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Vice Chair McDonald moves to adopt Tuesday at 10:30 a.m. in room 521 of the House Office Building as the normal day, time, and location for meeting of the House Transportation, Mobility, and Infrastructure Committee. Will the clerk please take the vote?
Chair Shannon.
Yes.
Representatives McDonald.
Yes.
Coleman.
Yes.
Conlon.
Yes.
Farhat.
Yes.
Fitzgerald.
Yes.
Hoskins.
Yes.
Miller.
Yes.
Outman.
Yes.
Roth.
Yes.
Bruck. Koontz.
Yes.
St. Germain.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, you have 12 yeas, no nays, no pass. The time, day, and location is adopted.
Thank you. The House Transportation, Mobility, and Infrastructure Committee will follow the Chapter 4 stated in the House standing rules that were adopted on the House floor. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and welcome committee members. Just give a few brief remarks before we start our first presentation for the day. There's a lot of important issues that are going to come up before us, and I look forward to working with all of you over the next 2 years. I've had a lot of respect for my predecessor who sat in this chair. I will tell you that in a previous life, I was not a radio personality, so I don't think that this committee will be as entertaining as it has been over the past 4 years with our prior chair. But I did appreciate the way that he ran his committee. So I want to take a page out of his book and start us out with a series of presentations. There are several new members on our committee today. These presentations will come from those organizations and groups that can help us understand our role and the issues that we're going to be facing here in this committee. So with that, our first presenter is John Lamacchia from the Michigan Municipal League. So John, if you would step up, we'd really appreciate it.
You got it? Yeah, please. Well, good morning. Thank you for having me, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. John Lamacchia with the Michigan Municipal League. Happy to be here today to talk to you and quite frankly, to give the first presentation to this committee. I have spent the last 10 years at the League working primarily on transportation infrastructure issues. Some of you are familiar to me. Some of this is your first experience, both with me as an individual and us as an organization. And so I want to take some time today, at least at the beginning of this presentation, getting you familiar with who we are. Now, I'll be sure to talk about some transportation issues, and please feel free to ask some questions at the end of this. But ultimately, I want to make sure that you understand who we are as an organization, what we believe in, what really drives us at the end of the day, and then ultimately how those things tie to transportation, and particularly as we look at this committee this year dealing with both transportation, mobility, and infrastructure. And those three things, have a lot of ties and common threads that can be looked at through multiple lenses outside of just the roadbed itself. So I want to make sure that I give due respect to our amazing team at the League in our State Affairs Department. Jennifer Rigdrink, our assistant director, is currently in Florida. She may be in the hot tub at this particular moment, enjoying the sun, celebrating her parents' 50th wedding anniversary, so congratulations to them. Harrisana Richards, our legislative associate, and then Betsy Richardson, our Capitol Office coordinator, all of which do an amazing and phenomenal job for us, and you'll become familiar with and see around in multiple committees through this legislative session. You know, the organization itself began back in 1899, and so we are actually in the process of getting ready to celebrate next year our 125th anniversary as an organization. We were established with 44 original founding members. Our first meeting was May 23rd of 1899, and our first league president was from the city of Saginaw. Our Lansing presence began in 1957. We opened up our Ann Arbor office, which is where we are currently headquartered, in 1971, along with our Lansing presence that we maintain today. And then we believe we've met the moment as the moment needed to be met, and really adjusted with times and things that happened within both our culture and our society. And our first African-American league president, and eventually our league executive director, was in 1978. Our first female league president was in 1979, and our first African-American female league president was Brenda F. Moore out of the city of Saginaw, who's their current mayor today, in 2019. And we have grown to 523 members, which is where we remain today in 2023. Just for the record, there are 533 cities and villages in the state, and so from a membership perspective, we maintain a close relationship with nearly every single one of them. You know, organizationally, we've done a variety of things along the way, too, that have allowed to meet those moments, as I had just mentioned. Our Michigan Municipal Executives began in 1930. That is really a collection of city managers, village managers, and has now been expanded to include township supervisors and county executives. One of the cores of our organization, which began, nearly 100 years ago, was training. And we are very committed to training newly elected officials. Some of you sitting here today have gone through some of that training. Our Michigan Association of Municipal Attorneys also began in 1935, the Michigan Association of Municipal Clerks in 1939, our Michigan Association of Mayors in 1939. In 1978, we began the Michigan Women in Municipal Government program, followed by the creation of our Workers' Comp Fund and our insurance pools in 78 and 82, respectively, and our Legal Defense Fund in 1983. We also operate a foundation. And this really helped us meet our mission, which I'll talk about here in a second. But some of that core goes back to 1935 when we talked about training. And basically, as an organization, we understand the importance of integrating newly elected officials and employees into what local government does and what its mission is. And then in 2004, we created the Michigan Black Caucus of Locally Elected Officials. That continues to be an important component of our organization in terms of how we drive membership and how we deal with diversity and equity and inclusion in all that we do. And then one of the projects that we started most recently, and one that we are most proud of, is our 1650 project. And some may look at that and say, well, what does that mean? And that is the recognition that when we looked at local government management and those that were city managers and village managers, while women made up 50% of the population, only 16% of them at the management level were actually women. And so we put a concerted effort into training those that wanted to be in that management space, and I can tell you today that number has now risen to over 20% based on the last 5 years' worth of work that we have done in that specific program. So our mission is very important to us. It is something that we look at and know and understand and try to live every day. And while I tend not to read a lot of slides, I'm going to read this one out loud. It says, the Michigan Municipal League is dedicated to making Michigan's communities better by thoughtfully innovating programs, energetically connecting ideas and people, actively serving members with resources and services, and passionately inspiring positive change in Michigan's greatest centers of potential, its communities. And we believe that. We believe that deeply, and our work is reflective of that on a daily basis. At the League, as we like to say, we love where you live. And that's not just from a community standpoint as we think about the four walls of City Hall. That is truly community as it relates to the people that live there, the businesses that thrive there, and those that visit. And when we talk about placemaking, which we have sat before committees like this for over a decade now, really being a leader in that space, We are now moving into the second phase of that, maybe even the third phase of that, depending on how you look at it. And we want to build upon that and really start to talk about how we have equitable growth in these communities, what that means for its individuals that live there, what it means for its residents, and what it means for its businesses and visitors alike. Really looking at safeguarding the economics of this, providing strategies that are going to equip communities to deal with the ebbs and flows of both the local economy, the state economy, the national economy, and global forces. We call that lens community wealth building. And this is really important because as we look at defining what that is, a lot of ways that defines it as placemaking with an equity lens in its simplest form. It occurs when community leaders, partners, businesses, and residents collaborate to develop equitable, resilient, adaptable, sustainable places to improve the human experience. We are learning more and more and more that as much as we talk about communities, it really comes down to people. And in this space, as we, as leaders of those communities, need to be cognizant of that. And to steal a quote from our executive director, our role in local government is not to be the life of the party, it's to be the host of the party. And that becomes very important to allow those that operate in our communities to thrive. So as I said, some notes on community wealth building. Really, it is placemaking with an equity lens. We look at this as a way in which to build trust and a sense of belonging, and really is the core of what we think about as we interact with those that interact with us. It's co-creation that enables self-authorship. You know, that concept of ownership becomes critically important in the way in which we work together. Work is local and context matters, and that is unique between every community that is out there. There is no one-size-fits-all solution in most cases. That uniqueness is what makes us special. That uniqueness is what gives us our identity. And then, as we said before, we focus on the human experience. That human experience in terms of how people both live in those communities, how they feel, how they belong, and the way in which others from both inside the state and outside the state view us becomes incredibly important. But sometimes measuring this requires new metrics. And that's why we came up with this great graph. You know, and it really does focus on the center being trust and belonging. But it focuses on some key categories of arts and culture, financial security, infrastructure, lifelong learning, public health, sustainability. And I'll talk about these in more detail as we move on. But it's really, you know, a model where we balance economic prosperity with a sense of place, those natural assets and cultural substance. And we consider the importance of safety, health, and well-being of our residents, as well as the ongoing process of lifelong learning over time. And it's this interconnected between these individual subsets of this wheel that really create a community at its core. But how does that transition into what we're going to talk about in this committee, which is really transportation, mobility, and infrastructure? And the interconnectedness between this is really direct. Infrastructure is easy to draw a straight line to, right? When we think about roads, when we think about transit, when we think about water and sewer and the ways in which those provide services to our residents, move people and goods, it's right there. But doing so in a sustainable way becomes really important. We need to think about the decisions that we're making today and how it's going to impact us, not just next year or 5 years from now, but 10 years from now, 30 years from now, 50 years from now. Infrastructure is a long-term investment. Investing in our ability to attract talent and retain that talent is a long-term investment. And that financial security becomes a very direct part of that. Understanding the fact that we need to provide opportunities for individuals and that communities play a role in that is an increasingly important effort in our ability to be competitive, not just here in this state, not just here in this nation, but quite frankly, globally. Providing access to education, whether that be, you know, from our youngest students to our pre-K students all the way up through college and beyond. You know, there are many times individuals, as they grow older, need to make transition in jobs. They need new education. I watched my wife, quite frankly, just the other day graduate with her master's in nurse education. I won't say how old she is because you never know who's listening. But it has been a process. And because of that access and that opportunity, that lifelong learning becomes incredibly important to the things that those individuals are able to offer, both to their families, to their community, and to the state as a whole. And public health, as we think about that, whether it's the delivery of clean water, access to mental health services, the ability to find care when you need it, as we think about aging populations, the ability to do that in places that are comfortable, whether that be your home or other places. And then arts and culture, which really fits into amenities. You know, the ability for communities to have places where people have opportunity to go and recreate, to visit museums, to go to the public library, is really important to how we, whether we are large or small, interact with those that call our communities home. When we think about maximizing our transportation network, as we really dive into this a little bit deeper, there is a bigger picture to this. You know, the idea that our transportation is not curb to curb is really important. While we do have to maintain the road and filling potholes and rebuilding that infrastructure is important, the way in which it interacts with other environments also becomes important. How do our small businesses operate on Main Street? Do they have access? Can people get there, right? Whether it is by car, by bus, by bike, or by walking. Because we are living in an increasingly mobile environment. That mobile environment demands access to alternative modes of transit. Ensuring that those alternative modes of transit are there, available, safe, and don't have conflicts become increasingly important. That desire for walkable communities, you know, resides directly within the space of mobility and directly some of the issues this committee is likely to address. But I think one of the most important things that we can talk about today is using this as an economic driver. Transportation and that infrastructure and the way in which we utilize it can truly be an economic driver in this state. It defines and gives clues to employers that are looking to locate here. It talks to employees in the way in which they have access to opportunity to both move and to live. And talent will pay attention to that. And I do think there are some things that we know. What is that, right? We know that we are in a knowledge-based economy. We know that education counts and degrees matter. We know that technology now allows people to work from anywhere. We are and do have a very mobile population, more so now than we've ever had it before. We know that place attracts people, and we know that young people right now increasingly look to where they want to live first before they ever look for a job. And that competition for talent is real. Our opportunity today is to meet that moment, to provide those places where people can find these opportunities and continue to promote that collectively. You know, we need to think about a system designed for all users, and I sort of challenge you to think about some goals to consider as we get through this process. You know, very often we talk about level of service when we talk about transportation. How quickly do we get things to and from places? And a lot of times when we think about context, particularly our freeway network, that matters, right? And I'm not going to ask anybody ever to put the bike lane on a freeway or to ask pedestrians to be on the freeway. But we do need to think about what that means as we translate from that network to our county road system, down into our local road system, down into our neighborhoods. And so we need to think about creating situations that offer minimal conflict between those modes and has clear expectations for those users along the way. We should not create barriers to destinations or endanger a particular group because we're not willing to look at and understand the context of those situations. That context, as I said previously, matters. Right? It matters to those individuals, whether you're just trying to walk to work, walk to school, whether you may be disabled and need access to opportunity so you can go and get to your job, right? Get to your point of education. But we also need to think about preparing for what's next. We need to be able to address issues, embrace emerging technologies. And so there are three, I think, really critical things here that I want to talk about. One is making sure we find sustainable funding models. We are in an ever-changing environment as it relates to the way in which we fund the system. There's going to be an emergence of new technologies. There's an emergence of electric vehicles. There's an emergence of alternative modes. We can talk about autonomous vehicles in this space as well. And we need to be able to support that, whether that's in the transit space, whether that's in the individual vehicle space, or whether that's in the fleet space. And when we talk about electric vehicles, we need to be able to improve our readiness, right? Are we ready as a state? Are our communities ready for this? Are we looking at it, again, through the lens of economic development? So where is that charger placed? And what does that individual behind the wheel do when that car is charging? Are they at the local coffee shop, right? Are they downtown, or are they sitting, in a location that doesn't provide them an opportunity to spend their resources in a place that matters? And then we need to think about impact on resources. And just recently, we were part of a study led by the County Road Association that talked about electric vehicles and the impact that is having on our transportation funding system. And particularly the fact that as those vehicles become more prevalent in the market, the amount of revenue that comes into the state will be slowly declining. And as we look at some of the projections in that study, we do have that as maybe as much as $500 million or $500 million by the year 2030. We also have to recognize, though, that is not just an EV issue, right? Other vehicles are becoming more fuel efficient. More hybrids are on the road. But we also need to be in a position where we embrace that change. We embrace that technology. When we think about sustainability, and when we think about our environment, and when we think about our climate and the impacts that it's going to have on it, how are we taking the steps to embrace those things in a way that both creates those sustainable funding models that we mentioned, but at the same time doesn't discourage individuals from making choices that may provide long-term beneficial impacts. And so as we focus on this question, and you as a committee focus on these things, we need to make sure we take a holistic approach to answering these questions, not looking at them in just segments, but really looking at them in the impact overall that it's going to have, not just on our system, not just on our funding mechanisms, but on our state, on our communities, and those that are using those systems day in and day out. A couple of final things to leave you with is, one, let's get to work. Now's the time. There's a moment of opportunity here for Michigan that we need to capitalize on. At our best in this state, we are innovators. We are makers. Right? We talk about putting the world on wheels in this. We can continue to do that, and we should continue to do that. We have an amazing history here, amazing culture, sustainable geography, great bones at its core. Let's leverage that day in and day out. We need to have and do have vision, ambition, ownership. We can change those expectations, and ultimately we need to move forward. Right? And doing so requires thought. Doing so requires intentional policy. Doing so sometimes requires that we make decisions that are hard. And that is the can do, right? That is the can do. We need to focus on what we can do, not give excuses for why we can't. And I think if we focus on the can, we're going to be much more successful, not just in this particular setting here, but where we want to get to as a state, where we envision our communities getting to as individual, unique places of opportunity. And we are looking forward to that day in and day out to have that conversation with you. And I will leave you with this. A quote from the Forbes publisher that said, "The most valuable resource in the 21st century is brains. Smart people tend to be mobile. Watch where they go, because where they go, robust economic activity will follow." And that really drives home the point that transportation, infrastructure, and mobility is an economic driver, one that we can capitalize on, one that will make us more competitive, one that will ultimately drive population growth in this state. And if we continue to look at it through that lens, I think we can be very successful. So while maybe not a lot on transportation specifically, I think that gives you a good idea of who we are as an organization. I'm happy to answer any specific questions and get into some deep policy conversations and thought, whether that be today or into the future. But I'm happy and honored to be able to present before the committee today. So thank you, Chair Shannon. Thank you, members of the committee, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Well, thank you so much, John. I really appreciate the presentation and for you joining us today. Just for my committee members, if you do have a question, if you just want to give sort of the high sign to either your vice chair or if Dakota, if you can get her attention, that's the best way to be able to get on the list to ask a question. John, I do have a question, and you mentioned it briefly about public art. And I'll get to the actual question, and it may be somewhat unique to my district, but can you talk about how using public art to create identity translate to an economic benefit? And the reason that I bring this up is because, which I'm sure you're familiar with, M59 in Macomb County, Hall Road, right? So 5-lane on either side, very high traffic. And so the city of Sterling Heights decided to put up some public art there to highlight the billions of dollars of economic activity that actually take place there. Can you, and to help me too, to explain it to people who think that it's sort of a waste of money or not necessarily aesthetically pleasing. Can you talk to how public art can be a valuable asset to communities, and we use that thoroughfare to highlight the economics that are going on on either side of the road. And so just would love to get your perspective. I know that you guys do a lot of work in this area. Would love to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, we do a lot of work in this space, and it really drives at the core of what placemaking is. And as I mentioned, communities are unique, so public art takes on a lot of forms. Sometimes it can be in the form of a memorial, right? So we think about, quite frankly, 9/11 in the city of Lansing has a piece of steel from one of the World Trade Center towers. That is public art, right? But it also serves as a way in which to memorialize that particular moment in time. We can think about murals that are painted in alleys to give them life, right? To make sure that people feel safe in that space that may otherwise have been dark. And then otherwise, it is utilized as a tool to embrace the cultural aspects of those individual communities, highlighting the diversity and the uniqueness of each of them, and empowering those individuals to share their words, their thoughts, and their ideas around particular topics. That becomes powerful, right? And that drives at what really is at the heart of community wealth building, which is trust and belonging. So providing those spaces that are open for individuals to be expressive is really important. So not only is it good for the community, good for that individual, it also showcases the welcomingness that we need to as a state and as individual places where people may look to utilize us as examples or even, quite frankly, places to live.
And I'll just add to that we use that corridor. We call it the Golden Corridor, and put up the golden halo because a lot of times, especially in suburban areas, Macomb County, Oakland County, a lot of people don't know where they're at, right? And so we want to identify ourselves, and we do that through this public art initiative. And I believe that it's something that we should continue doing, and using those places that people travel highly. There's hundreds, probably 100,000 people that travel that road every single day to highlight where they're at. And I think that public art that's on display there really does have some sort of an effect. So let's see. I will go to Minority Vice Chair Outman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, John, for being here. Thank you for your presentation. Just got a quick technical question for you, and you'll have to forgive my ignorance. I've never served on transportation or local government for that matter. I was just curious, what is the primary source of revenue sharing for cities and villages? Is it via sales tax?
Yeah, so I'm thrilled to turn this into a municipal finance conversation, right? We can do that. So when we think about communities right now, they primarily have two sources of funding. So they have property taxes, and then they have state shared revenue, right? There are other forms of which they've utilized, obviously, passing millages. There are a couple of communities, about 24 of them, that have a local income tax, but that is actually really rare. As I had mentioned, there are 533 cities and villages, but there's also 1,240 townships, 83 counties, and so the structure of local government, by and large, is funded in two ways. So property taxes, state shared revenue. Property taxes, as you know, took a drastic hit in the recession, and many communities are still not back to pre-recession levels. And then we've talked about revenue sharing at length and some of the ways in which previous legislatures have decided to cut that funding. And then when we think about restoration of that, just to give you a big eye-opening number, statutorily, if you were to fully fund that formula today, we're about $700 to $750 million short on an annual basis from fully funding communities. Just to take one little bit step deeper on that is the idea that many of our budgets are 50% built on public safety cost. Okay. Now, there are other forms and streams of revenue. We'll talk in this committee very directly about Act 51. But when we think about what are the primary drivers at the local level, it's property taxes and state share.
Okay, and I didn't mean to turn it into a municipal finance question, but one of my main priorities is, local road funding and how do we, better and adequately fund that. And I don't know if it's through increasing revenue sharing. I know we've had to make some tough cuts throughout the years, but getting that back up to the level that it needs to be at. But certainly the local roads in my district need some help, and So I'll be curious to see your thoughts on that moving forward.
Yeah, and I'm happy to have that conversation. I think what we like to point out, right? First road everybody touches every morning is the one that's at the end of their driveway.
Sure.
And those are the ones, quite frankly, that sometimes have been neglected the most. And so finding funding models that address that particular, almost neighborhood level issue is going to be really critical to us, and we're happy to work with you on that.
Absolutely. Thank you again for being here.
Representative Roth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. John, thank you. Appreciate your presentation. And one thing that caught me right off the bat was helping municipalities learn where to put charging stations. I have a nearby community that puts 4 charging stations in a park, which limited the amount of people that could park there when we have none downtown at a coffee shop or anywhere down there. So I would like to talk to you more about that as we go forward, because smart sharing or smart putting these in the right areas is really important. Let's not create, we think we're doing a great job. We're actually taking away parking spots for a park.
I think that's a conversation we're willing to have. I know there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes right now, with multiple entities, not just us thinking about it. And so, good topic for discussion, and happy to do whatever we can to help.
Thank you.
Representative Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Chair. John, thank you so much for being here today. My question centered around non-vehicular transportation, primarily pedestrian travel, and how that can factor into not only attraction but also retention of people who are there. We recognize that there are thoroughfares and vehicular transit lines that will affect safety for potentially students who are traveling to school. I was fortunate to grow up in a community where I could have walked to school K through 12. Not every community is that way. Not every community has safe pedestrian travel, and I'm just curious about that being a retention model for communities, not to lose people due to safety, but also thinking about how do we expand that in order to promote safety from people who, again, may be transit challenged. We're seeing that in my district specifically, we have fatalities on one of our main thoroughfares frequently, more than once a year, which is far too often. We're working to remedy that, but I'm just curious to know your thoughts on that topic.
Yeah. Where do I start? It's something that we've talked about a lot, and I think there's a lot of different ways to approach that. There is no question that one of the most impactful components of that is design, right? And so whether we think about it from just simply the way in which we design that roadway, think about maybe converting it from a 4-lane, 2 in each direction, putting it on a road diet, as we would say, and converting that to 1 way in each direction with a center turn lane is a potential option, including, bike lanes in that, right? Whether they're protected or not. Making sure we think about transit-oriented development. And I want to keep coming back to this topic. Sometimes we become very, very focused on just the specific issue at hand, which we categorize as transportation. But there are arguments to be made that the way we think about our housing policy, the way we think about our economic development policy, all play into this at a greater level. And ensuring that there are connected spaces and threads between those becomes really important. The way we think about setting speed limits, quite frankly, which is something that we've talked a lot about at the end of the day. And then how we position ourselves from a community basis to deal with the intersection of different jurisdictions. And what I mean by that is, in a municipality, in some cases, particularly in Southeast Michigan more than others, but in most communities, you will see some intersection of jurisdiction, where you have both local roads, you have county roads, and then you have M roads. And many, many times, M roads act as Main Street, particularly in our smaller communities. So how do we deal with that, but also continue to meet what is the level of service that is needed to move traffic efficiently through there, but do so safely, but doesn't impede the ability for somebody to utilize that roadway as an economic development tool, to get kids to school, to ensure we have access to jobs, recreation, whatever it may be. And that is the challenge that we still need to continue to tackle, because, to one of your original questions, can it be a talent attraction tool? It should be a talent attraction tool. We should be able to promote this to those on the outside, that we have places that are livable, that people can come, can bring a family, and can feel safe. And the more we utilize design and incorporation of economic development and housing policies into that, the more successful we will become.
No other questions. Seeing that there are no absent members, there being no further business before the committee will stay adjourned.